In this video, Jordan Peterson explains the differences between men and women on so many levels.
Now, one of the things that is characteristic of modern culture is that we associate almost unthinkingly, axiomatically, agreeableness with virtue. And we think that compassion, empathy, are virtues that should predominate in people's virtue hierarchy and that they should be fostered. But one of the things that's very much worth considering is that all virtues turn into vices if you push them far enough. And that's part of the reason why they would be normally distributed, right? Because every trait has a range within which it's functional, and outside of that range, the probability that it will be functional starts to become very, very low. Now, empathy, warmth, and compassion sound like very good things, but they can also be construed as trusting, submissive, and compliant, which could be perceived as naivete, docility, and a tendency to follow rather than lead. Now, we do know that one of the predictors of dependent personality disorder is high levels of agreeableness, and that is a disorder that is more characteristic of women. And anxiety disorders and depressive disorders are also much more prevalent in women. And that's likely associated not with agreeableness, but with high levels of negative emotion. Now, this paper, 2001, is the effects of personality on executive career success in the US and Europe. Now, you know, everybody talks about the glass ceiling, right? And the idea that women make less money than men for the same amount of work. Well, the first thing I would say is that's not true for single people, just so you know. And it isn't obvious that the reason that women make less money than men when they do is because of prejudice. So women are more likely to work part-time, for example, and the reasons for that are pretty obvious. All you have to do is think about that for 15 seconds to figure out why. And the reason is that many women have children in their 30s, and one of the ways of balancing the development of your career with the burden of having children, or the wonder of having children, depending on how you look at it, is by working part-time. Now, one of the problems with that, well, there's two problems, potentially. Well, I'll show you the next slide before I get into that. Okay, so, I'll go to this next one, yeah. Okay, so here's some correlations. One of them is between how much money you make and your personality. So the correlation between neuroticism and how much money you get paid is negative 0.3. The higher you are in neuroticism, the less you make, less you get paid. Why? Why do you think that is? Well, because you're not confident in your own abilities. You have low self-esteem. And if you're not confident in your own abilities and you're anxious about your performance, the probability that you're going to feel confident and calm about negotiating for more money or even asking for a raise is quite low. Extroversion and money made, virtually no correlation. Openness, no correlation. Agreeableness, negative 0.24. Now, you might not think that those correlations are very large, but if the correlation between neuroticism and money made is negative 0.3, if you translate that into an effect size, this is called a binomial effect size distribution, just the effect of neuroticism will ensure that 65% of men make more money than average and 35% of women make more money than average. Just the effect of neuroticism. And if you add neuroticism and agreeableness together, I have to do the math because I have to take the square root. It's 0.5. I can't do that in front of a class, unfortunately. It's going to push it up to about 70-30 or higher than that. There's a little bit of a negative correlation between conscientiousness and money made. Ascendancy, how well you progress up the ranks. Yes?
What's the difference between direct and indirect and all the traits?
I don't know, because I didn't look in detail into the models they use, so I was just going to stick to the zero order correlations. So, ascendancy. Negative 0.21 for neuroticism, negative 0.14 for agreeableness. The effects are larger if you total them. Let's see. Here's a good one. This is something to think about. Job satisfaction. The correlation with neuroticism is negative 0.42. That's a big one. One of the things that's very interesting about neuroticism is it's also a very good predictor of marital satisfaction. And it's interesting in that light to note that 70% of divorces are initiated by women. Now, one reason for that is that men are impossible to get along with. And the other possibility is that women are too sensitive to that, and there's no way of sorting that out. But it's nonetheless interesting to note that that's still where the gender difference lies. Neuroticism. Correlation with job satisfaction, negative 0.42. Correlation with life satisfaction, negative 0.42. Correlation with career satisfaction, negative 0.41. So one of the things you want to remember is that almost all the measures that purport to measure something like well-being or happiness or satisfaction are so contaminated with neuroticism that it's not even clear that they're measuring something different. You see, agreeableness, the correlation with career satisfaction is negative 0.2. If you get men to rate their performance, and you get their bosses to rate their performance, men rate their performance pretty much the same as the bosses rate their performance, or maybe they rate them a little bit more. But if women rate their own performance, they rate their own performance as worse than their boss's rating of their performance consistently. And the predictor of that seems to be negative emotionality. Now you might wonder if negative emotionality is something that's associated with lower levels of life satisfaction across a broad variety of measures. What possible use could it be? But then you have to wonder, well, exactly how is the physical environment different for women and for men? And one clear fact is that at an individual level, at least in relationship to dominance battles with men, women are at a disadvantage, not least because of their size. Now, it is the case, for example, that women hit men in marital relationships more often than men hit women. But that's the sort of statistic that makes you wonder about measures and statistics. What's wrong with that measure?
If a man picks a woman, he's likely to do more damage, so they're more likely to win.
Exactly, that's exactly it. You know, so it depends precisely on how you define hit. You know, and it's a very tricky thing because it could be frequency, it could be frequency, that certainly might be a measure. But the best measure would likely be something like damage per blow.